Everybody who drives these roads has thought about it. The dead phone, the engine that won't turn over, the long walk in the dark to a light you're not sure is still on. Out here in Hollow County, being stranded isn't the danger. It's what's waiting in the dark. The thing I hit on Route 9 got back up. I hit it square at 30 miles an hour, felt it go under the car, and it stood back up in my headlights on legs that bent the wrong way. Then it screamed, and the scream was the sound of my own car crashing, played back at me out of its mouth. Everybody who drives Route 9 at night has a deer story. You clip one, you swerve one, you come around the Ash Fork Bend and there's a whole herd lit up green in your high beams. I'd had the normal version a dozen times, running that road home from second shift. This was not the normal version. The thing in the road didn't have its eyes where a deer's eyes go. It didn't run, and when I hit it, it did not die. I came around the Ash Fork Bend a little after 1 in the morning, doing maybe 50. The high beams swept the guardrail and the black wall of pines. And then there was something standing in my lane. It was tall. A deer stands just below chest high on a man, and you catch one low, in the body, and it comes up over the hood. This thing was standing upright, the way a person stands. Its head up above my headlights instead of down in them, so the beams lit it from the waist down and left the top of it in the dark. What I could see was 2 dark hollows where the green shine of a deer's eyes should have been, set high on a long, pale skull. Then I hit it. You don't break a 50-mile-an-hour car to 0 in the space you've got when a thing steps out at the bend. I got it down to maybe 30 before the front end hit. And 30 is enough. The bang was enormous. The hood buckled, the airbag went off into my face like a fist, and my head went forward and then back into the rest so hard that something in my neck let go. With a sound I felt more than heard. The car slewed, caught the gravel shoulder, and stopped crossways, the engine screaming and then dying, steam already climbing white through the ruined hood. For a while I just sat there. I wasn't thinking about monsters. I was thinking the ordinary things, that I'd wrecked my car, that my neck was wrong, that I couldn't turn my head to the right without a bolt of it going down into my shoulder, that I'd have to call somebody and stand in the cold and deal with all of it. The pain had my whole attention. That's the last stretch of that night that belonged to the ordinary world, and I didn't know to be grateful for it. Then, off to the side where it had come down, in the dark past the reach of the dead headlights, the thing I'd hit started to get up. The headlights had died with the engine, but the parking lights hadn't. The car sat crossways, so they threw their low red-orange wash off across the road, toward the shoulder where it had come down. And it was in that wash that I watched it stand. It shouldn't have been able to stand. I'd hit it square at 30 and felt it come up over the hood and go off the side. But it gathered itself up off the asphalt the way a hurt thing does, in stages. And the stages were all wrong. First a hump of shoulder rising, too high. Then legs unfolding under it, and there were too many joints in them, or the joints were in the wrong places. So the legs came up under it like a spider's do, in angles a deer's legs can't make. It got its feet under it, and it rose, and it rose, and it kept rising. Up past deer height, up past the height of the ruined hood, until it stood in the red parking light glow on legs like knotted saplings, and looked back across at my car. I could see it now. It had been a deer once, maybe, or it wore the front of one. There was the long skull, the suggestion of where antlers rot off, but the hide was gone to patches over a body that was nothing but frame, ribs like a hand of fingers closing, the belly drawn up so hard against the spine you could have passed a rope through the gap. It was starved. Not thin, starved. The way nothing alive stays starved and keeps standing. A body kept walking a long way past the point where it should have quit. And under the long skull, low, where a jaw would be, there was too much jaw. And it hung open. And it was breathing in a way I could hear from inside the car. A wet, working, hungry sound, in and out. Like something smelling a meal it hasn't reached yet. It looked at my car. Then it lifted that long head. And it screamed. And the scream sounded like the crash itself. The crunch of metal, the bang of the airbag played back. It had heard the wreck, and was repeating it, out of that hanging jaw, note for note. Testing the sound, trying it on. I did not move. I wanted to panic, to scream and get out and run, but some instinct held me very still and very quiet. And it was that instinct that kept my hand off the door handle. Because every other part of me wanted out of that crushed car and away. And the still part of me knew that out of the car was exactly the worst place to be. It came a few steps across the road toward the car, each leg folding and bending at joints that shouldn't have been there, knees closing the wrong way, ankles doubling back. The whole gate stepped and hitched, like a hand of long fingers walking. It stopped just at the edge of the parking lights, where the red glow gave out into dark. It would not come into the light. That was the one rule of the night I could see it obey. The one thing that was true the whole time. It stayed at the edge of what light there was, and it waited. And it tried to wear me down with sound, and get me to panic. The car crash screamed first, over and over, until it got bored. Then it tried other things. It made the sound of a hurt animal, a fawn in distress bleat, the exact call a hunter blows on a plastic tube to bring a doe in. And I understood, hearing it, that the call works both ways, that the thing at the edge of the dark was blowing that call at me, trying to bring me out to a hurt animal the way a doe comes to a fawn. When I didn't respond, it tried something new. It made a voice. The first word came out mangled, like the first note out of an instrument nobody's played in years. And then it cleared, and it was a man's voice, and it said, "Hello?" Just that. Hello? The way you'd call it out a car window to a shape on the road, checking if they're okay. My own voice, near enough. Pulled off the sound of me swearing and groaning after the wreck, assembled into a word I hadn't said, and tossed out of the dark. Then it said, "You okay in there?" And then it said my name. I don't know where it got it. I've thought about the registration in the glove box, the mail on the passenger seat. Some way a hungry thing on a Kentucky back road reads a name off someone it's decided to eat. But it said my name in a voice built out of my own, the voice of somebody who stopped to help. It is the worst thing I have ever heard. Everything raised in me to answer to my own name wanted to answer that voice. And the wanting was deeper than the fear. It sat out there in the dark and worked on that wanting for hours. I did the only thing I could do. I stayed in the car, and I waited for the one thing on that road I could count on. That Route 9 is a work road, and the shift traffic starts before dawn. I had hours of waiting till the morning traffic started. My neck had swollen, so I couldn't turn my head. The thing had come to my side, so I couldn't look straight at it. I had to hold it at the corner of my eye, a shape lit red by the car's lights, just off the edge of the windshield. And it never rushed, and it never left. It ran through its voices. It was me, and then it was a woman's voice I didn't know, maybe a voice it had kept from someone else it encountered. And the woman cried and asked for help. It tried an official, flat voice. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." It had them all. Every voice that a stranded man on a dark road is trained to trust and open his door to, played one after another at the edge of the dark. And the only thing that saved me was that my neck hurt too much to turn, and the still part of me had decided we were not opening that door if the president himself knocked on it. Twice it lost patience with talking, and I heard it move. The click of those long legs on the asphalt, circling wide around the car, out past the lights. And once, a weight came down on the hood, light, testing, and the ruined metal ticked. And through the windshield, Upside down and close, that long, starved skull looked in at me with its dark, hollow eyes, and the jaw hung open 6 inches from the glass, and breathed its wet, hungry breath onto the windshield, until the glass fogged, and I lost the sight of it. Then it climbed off, unhurried, and went back to the edge of the dark, and went back to the voices. Because it was patient the way only true hunger is patient. It had decided I would open the door eventually, and it could wait. I did not open the door. The sky over the Cutchin edge had just started to gray when I saw real headlights come around the Ash Fork bend behind me. High beams swinging across my Crossways car. A set of them, and then another. The first of the shift trucks, running down out of Ash Fork toward the county line. The thing at the edge of the dark heard them before I did. It lifted its head off whatever voice it was making, and it turned that long skull up the road toward the coming lights. And for the first time all night, something in the set of it changed. Not fear, exactly. A body that's starved doesn't fear the way we do, but a kind of grudge. The grudge of a thing that has waited hours over a meal, and hears the dinner bell rung by somebody else. It gave my car one more look, and then it went. Not into the woods on its wrong spider legs, but up. The long body folding and springing up the cut bank, and over the guardrail, and into the black pines above the road, faster than anything that's starved has a right to move. Gone, before the first truck's lights swept the place it had stood. The trucker found me locked in the car, forward, unable to turn my head. He thought at first I was hurt worse than I was. The wreck, the airbag, the neck. He called it in. He stood by my window and talked to me, an ordinary man's ordinary voice. And it took me a long minute to be sure of him, to let myself believe a voice on that road again. I have never in my life been so glad of a stranger. They wrote it up as a deer strike. The damage fit. The height was wrong for a deer, but nobody measures the height of a dent, and deer is what goes on the form for anything you hit on Route 9 that leaves fur and doesn't leave a body. There was no body. There was blood on my hood, and a long smear of something up the road, and no animal at the end of it. The deputy said coyotes would have dragged it off by morning, and I let him say it, because what was I going to put in its place? My neck healed slow. I still can't turn my head all the way right. The cold finds the place the rest still comes back to. And I still drive Route 9, because it's the way home, and a man has to get home. But I don't stop on it anymore. Not for a shape in the road. Not for a herd animal crying in the dark past my lights. Not for a voice that calls out, asking if I'm okay. Not for a voice that knows my name. Especially not for that one. Whatever's out there learned my name in a single night, off a wrecked car, and gave it back to me in my own voice by morning. It's still out there, on the dark stretch past the Ash Fork bend, starved and patient, and studying the sounds we make. And the next time it calls a name down the road, out of the dark, in a voice you trust, worried, kind, it might not be mine, it's learned. It might be yours. I'd been nursing that alternator for weeks, hearing the belt whine on every grade and telling myself, payday first. So when it finally quit, the first thing I felt was the flat embarrassment of a man who watched a problem coming and drove straight into it anyway. My phone had 1 bar, then none, depending how I held it. I got a text out to my brother. Belt died past the bridge, gonna sleep it off, call in the morning. And watched the progress wheel spin a long time before the message went through. He didn't answer. It was past midnight. He was asleep, like anybody sane. Too far to walk back to the Piney Fork gas and go at the county line. Nothing ahead for miles. The smart move was to lock the doors, tip the seat, and wait for gray light. A dead car is still a locked steel box. It's still shelter. I got the seat back. I got maybe 10 minutes of thin, floating half-sleep. Then, across the river, the whistle blew. Not a train. I knew the freight horn, that long doubled note that moves off and fades. This didn't move. One flat blast, low and huge, The kind of sound with a whole building standing behind it, and it came off the mill and held for 4 seconds and stopped. A shift whistle, the sound a works makes to tell 1,000 men their hours have started. The Ferris works hadn't blown that whistle in my lifetime. There was no one over there to blow it for. I sat up. The lit window was still burning, a dirty amber square high in the structure, sodium lamp color. And while I watched, a second one came on beside it. Then a third, lower down. Not together, one after another, the way lights come on when somebody's walking a building throwing switches. I wasn't scared yet, and the reason was the river. There was a whole width of moving black water between me and whatever was throwing those switches. It was like watching a storm 2 counties off. Something big was happening, but it was happening over there, on the far side, somewhere I'd never have to stand. Then a shape came out onto the Piney Fork Bridge. I had twisted around in my seat by then. The whistle and the lights were behind me, back the way I'd come, and you don't sit staring forward at a dead dash while a shut-down mill wakes up over your shoulder. So I was turned, watching through the rear glass and the passenger side mirror, when the bridge gave me the shape. It was a 1/4 mile back up the road, the way I'd driven in. Against the faint sky I could see the trusses, and I could see something at the Ferris end of it, standing. Not crossing, standing right at the lip, the way you stand at a doorway when you're not sure the house is yours to enter. Even that far off, I could tell it was facing me. Hiker, drunk, somebody else broken down. I ran through the reasonable ones. Then it came off the bridge and started down the road, and I quit reaching for reasons, because of how it moved. It didn't cover the ground the way a body covers ground. One moment it was back by the bridge, small. I blinked, or the dark shifted, or a cloud dragged over what little moon there was, and it was nearer. Not walking nearer, jumped nearer. A whole stretch of road eaten in the half-second my eyes weren't holding it, so that it seemed to arrive in the gaps between my looking rather than travel the distance between. When I could see it steadily, it barely came on at all. A slow, uneven shuffle, a hitch, and a drag. It was the not seeing that let it close. Every time my attention flickered, it was suddenly 20 yards further along, canted a little differently, mid-step in a stride I never watched it take. I hit the locks again anyway, but they were down, all 4, the way I'd left them. That didn't help the way I wanted it to. And then I had to sit there and watch it come the whole 1/4 mile. Turning the key did nothing. A dry click, and the dash staying dark. I couldn't drive. I couldn't outrun a thing that ate the road in the spaces between my blinks, and my phone wouldn't hold a bar long enough to ring out. So I sat in a dead car and tried to keep my eyes locked on the shape, because as long as I held it steady, it only crept. But a man can't not blink, can't not flinch when the wind moves the brush, and every lapse cost me 20, 30 yards of the only distance keeping it off me. The air in the car seemed to tighten with each jump, until I was breathing in little sips and gripping a wheel that wouldn't turn anything. 50 yards out I could make out the coat. Canvas, gone gray, a corduroy collar, a knit cap, something swinging in one hand, a lunch pail, an old steel one. A woman in her 50s, dressed for the overnight shift. Then a blink put her at 20 yards, and I almost laughed because she looked like somebody's mother walking into work. Then she reached the passenger glass and bent to look in at me, and the laugh died in my throat, because her face was doing the wrong thing. Not rotted, not monstrous. Tired. A normal, tired, middle-aged face, and waiting on me. Waiting the way somebody waits when you're the one holding things up. Like I was late. Like I had her spot on the line. Under the tiredness sat a patience with no bottom to it. A patience like looking down a dry well and never hearing the stone land. She raised her free hand and tapped the glass. Twice. The friendly way you rap a coworker's window in the lot. "You coming in or what?" I didn't move. She tapped again. Then her mouth worked, slow. And though no sound came through the glass, I could read the shape of it. And the shape was a name. Not my name. A name put like a question. Like she was reading down a list and I was next on it. She tapped the glass a third time and I made myself look away from her. It was all I had left. the way a kid pulls the blanket up and decides the dark is empty because he can't see it. I fixed my eyes forward, on the dash. On the 40 feet of road, my headlights weren't lighting anymore, and I told myself, she was outside. I was inside. The doors were locked. Behind me, in the car, the seat springs shifted with someone's weight. She was at the window. I had watched her the whole quarter mile, and the back seat of my car had just taken on a body. Settling, the vinyl ticking under a weight the way your own couch does when someone sits down behind you. I looked at the passenger window. There was no one at the glass. I brought my eyes up to the rear-view mirror. She was in the back seat. She had been in the back seat, I understood, for longer than I could stand to think about. Maybe the whole time. Maybe since before I ever saw the shape on the bridge. Maybe the shape on the bridge had only ever been for show, a thing sent out front to hold my eyes at the window, while the real business got in behind me, pulled the door to, put the lock down, and waited for me to feel safe enough to close my eyes. The mirror only reflected a small part of her, but that part was enough. Whatever effort she'd been spending to look like somebody's mother on the overnight shift, she'd set it down back there in the dark. And what was sitting up behind me had a face that was still arranged like a face, but had stopped meaning it. The mouth gone slack and too wide. The skin the flat gray of something kept out of the sun for 60 years. And the eyes caught the last of the light and gave none of it back. Just two dull reflections of the dome light, fixed on the back of my head. She lifted the lunch pail into her lap, both hands folded over it, settled in, patient, ready to wait till I gave in. I did not make the choice to leave the car. My body did. I came out of that seat and through the driver's door with every ounce of speed I had. No plan, no thought of the dark or the miles, only the single unbearable need to not be in an enclosed space with the thing in the mirror. I hit the road on my hands and knees, got my feet, and I ran. Behind me I heard my own car door shut. Gentle, considerate. The sound of someone who isn't in a hurry. I ran down the center line toward the county line, toward the gas and go, toward anything deeper into my own county and further from that water. And for a while, running felt like enough. My legs worked. The road went by under me. I let myself believe the whole thing was behind me, in a stopped car. Then the road stopped giving anything back. It wasn't one thing I could point to. I was running full out, and the dark wasn't changing. The same guardrail on the left, the same drop to the black water, the same ridge shouldering up on the right, and it kept arriving, that same stretch, over and over, as if the road were feeding me one length of itself on a loop and calling it progress. There were no lights ahead that should have been ahead. The gas and go throws a glow you can see for a mile before you reach it, and there was no glow, just more of the same road unspooling out of nothing. I told myself I was turned around, spent, misjudging in the dark. I kept running. Then I saw the tree. A big one, lightning split down the middle years back so it stands in two pale forks, like a tuning fork driven into the bank. You pass it once on the riverside, coming in. I'd passed it that night. It was behind me, well behind me, between my car and the bridge. And it was ahead of me now, its two white prongs catching the little light there was, standing up out of the dark on the wrong side of me entirely. There was no version of the road that put it in front of me, but there it stood, and I understood the road had turned me around without ever letting me feel the turn. That I'd been running toward the water and the mill as hard as I thought I'd been running away. She didn't run. I looked back once and wished I hadn't, because she wasn't behind me at all. She was ahead of me, up the road in the direction I was running, and coming on the way she'd come at the car. Not walking so much as arriving, a hitch and a drag when I held her steady, then a whole stretch of road gone in the half second I blinked, suddenly nearer, canted a little differently, mid-step in a stride I never saw her take, lunch pail swinging. As though she'd been set down there to meet me, as though the road had folded in the dark and handed me back to her. I turned and ran the other way, and she was ahead of me that way too, the same gray shape jumping the gaps between my looking, the same swing of the pail. There was no direction on that road that didn't have her arriving into it. I was between two of her, or one of her twice, guardrail on one side and the drop to the river on the other, and the river had started to sound wrong. Not the working murmur it had been, but something slower and thicker, like water that had stood a long time and didn't want to move. Across the water the mill answered me. As I ran, its windows lit. Not one at a time now, but in long banks, floor after floor coming up amber, the whole dead structure filling with light the way a plant lights for a shift change, for 1,000 men coming in. And every time my feet slowed, every time the running threatened to fall apart into stumbling, the whistle blew that flat 4-second note, and I swear it was blowing for me, marking my hours, telling the building I was on my way. The only thing that still made sense to me was the bend in the road. Route 9 doesn't run straight to the line. It swings out and hugs the bank before it climbs away and crosses into Hollow proper. She was on the inside of that curve, both of her, all of her, never hurrying because she never had to, arriving, dropping back to a shuffle, arriving again. And the shoulder ahead of me was narrowing, the guardrail giving out, the drop to the black water coming up close on my running side. I understood then what the folded road was for. She wasn't going to catch me. She didn't need to catch me. She only needed to keep me on that curve until it ran me out over the water. I had to come across on my own. I stopped, planted my feet on the last of the crumbling shoulder with the bank falling away a yard past my shoe, and between one breath and the next, she was even with me. No movement, just there. Close enough that I could hear the rattle of the lunch pail handle, close enough to smell her, cold iron and machine oil and standing water, the smell of the inside of a dead plant. She put her hand out, not grabbing, open, palm up, the way you offer a hand to somebody stepping down off a high place. Patient, waiting for me to take it, and step off the shoulder and come across. Because I had to be the one to step, and I could feel myself wanting to. Standing there spent, one breath from the edge, some worn-through part of me wanted to put my hand in hers, just to have the deciding be over. Headlights came around the bend. A county road truck, running late, high beams swinging up off the curve and full into the both of us. And in the half-second the light held on her, whatever she was drew back from it, and I felt the hand that had been an inch from mine close once on the empty air where I'd stood, because I was already gone, already stumbling out into the road, waving my arms in the headlights like a man on fire. Brakes, the bark of tires. The truck slewed and stopped, and a door came open, and a voice was asking me, "What in hell?" And behind me, one last time, I heard the rattle of the lunch pail handle. When I turned, she was already 20 feet back up the road, going the way she'd come, receding in that same wrong way, a drag and a hitch when my eyes held her, then further off in the blink between, 20 feet and then 40, toward the bridge, as though her shift had been called and she was due at a different gate. She didn't look back. Across the river, the banked lights in the Ferris works were going out, floor by floor, in the order they'd come up, until only the high amber square was left, and then that too. The whistle blew once more as the last light died, and it did not sound like a shift starting. It sounded like one called off. I got in the truck. I couldn't tell the driver anything that made sense, so I told him to just drive, please, over the line. And he looked at me, and looked at the empty road behind me, and something in his own face decided not to argue. We crossed into Hollow proper a mile on. The road ran straight and true the whole rest of the way, the split tree sliding past once, on the right where it belonged, and falling away behind us for good. The gas and go's glow coming up ahead right when it should have. Everything giving back what it took, like nothing had ever been wrong with any of it. Years later, the girl would still be able to feel the exact moment the water marked her. She was 5 years old on the roof of her mother's car, and the car was floating in the middle of a creek that had risen up over the road. Her mother had just pushed her up out of the window onto the wet metal, told her to get in the middle, hold on, and no matter what she saw or heard, not reach down past the edge. And for a moment, she was safe. And then something came up out of the black water, and closed around her bare ankle. Too many fingers joined, cold past cold, and began, without any hurry at all, to squeeze. That was the night the creek came up on the Cutchin. But it started the way these things do, with something so ordinary you'd never think to be afraid of it. It started with a crib. The errand had been nothing. That was the part the mother would have hated most, if she'd been given time to hate anything about it. That it was nothing. A run to the far side of the county to pick up a crib from a woman selling one cheap, because there was another baby coming in the spring, and money was close, and a good crib for $20 was worth the drive. She'd loaded it into the back of the station wagon in pieces, the rails and the slats and the little bag of bolts, and thanked the woman, and gotten her daughter buckled into the passenger seat, and started home with the light already going. The girl was 5, and she was in the type of mood a 5-year-old gets on an adventure, up past the edge of her ordinary day, riding shotgun like a grown-up. She'd been allowed to sit in front because it was just the two of them, and the crib took the back. She had her feet up on the seat and her shoes off, the way she wasn't supposed to, and her mother had looked over once and decided not to fight her about it. They talked about the baby. The girl wanted to know if the baby would sleep in the crib they just bought, whether the baby would be a brother or a sister, and whether she would have to share her room. The mother answered all of it in the easy half-attention of a woman driving a familiar road at dusk, watching the sky more than the conversation. The sky to the north, up over the ridges, had been building all afternoon into the flat blue-black of weather that hadn't decided yet whether to come down. It had been raining up there for 2 days. Not down in the valley, where they were. Down in the valley it had only sprinkled a little, wet the roads, moved on. But the girl's mother had grown up in that county, and she knew what 2 days of rain on the ridges meant. It meant the hollows were full. It meant every little dry bed branch and trickle up in the high country was running now. Running down, gathering, and that all of it was headed for the low creeks in the valley, and that it would get there late, hours after the last cloud had passed over, in the dark, when nobody was watching the water. So she thought about the crossings. She would have to take the Cutchin road home. The daylight was fading, and it was the short way. There was also supper to get going, and the little girl needed a bath. The Cutchin road had the 2 low water crossings on it. The 2 places where the county had never bothered to build a bridge and had just laid a concrete slab down across the creek and painted a sign. When flooded, turn around. She thought about the sign. She thought about the rain on the ridges, and she made the calculation every valley person makes, and decided the water wouldn't be up yet, not for hours, that she had time to slip across both crossings before the ridge water came down, and that the long way around, the highway, 40 minutes out of the way in the dark with a tired child, wasn't worth it. Her mother was right about the timing. That is the cruel part. She was right. The ridge water hadn't come down yet when they reached the first crossing. She had made the calculation correctly. She had simply made it against a thing that does not care about calculations, and that had been waiting, down in the deep holes of the Cutchin, for exactly the kind of night when a careful woman does everything right, and the water comes up anyway. They came down to the first crossing a little before dark had finished falling, and the slab was wet, and the water was skimming across it, thin and quick. An inch, maybe less, sliding silver in the last of the light. An inch of water on a slab is nothing. The mother had crossed that slab under a foot of water, and in worse weather than this. An inch didn't even register as a decision. She slowed a little, out of the habit her own father had drilled into her, and looked at the water to read which way it was moving and how fast. It was moving the ordinary way, downstream, unhurried, the creek just brushing the top of the concrete on its way past. Nothing in it. Nothing wrong with it. She let the wagon roll down onto the slab and across, the tires humming on the wet concrete, a little fan of spray going up on either side, and the girl said whee the way she always did on the crossings, because to a 5-year-old, driving through the top of a creek is a small thrill. And then they were up the far bank, and onto the low mile. The low mile is the stretch of the Cutchin road that runs between the 2 crossings. The road comes down off the bank after the first slab and runs along close beside the creek for about a mile, low, in the bottom, with the water on the right hand the whole way. and then climbs a little to the second crossing and goes over and up the far side and on toward home. The two crossings are the lowest points of all. They dip right down to the water and cross it at creek level, which is why they go under first when the creek comes up. The low mile between them sits just above the water, low in the bottomland, higher than the fords, but lower than the banks on either end. So that, in a hard rain, the crossings flood first, and the low mile floods second, as the creek climbs up out of its bed and spreads across the bottom. Everyone who drives the Cutchin knows this in the back of their mind, and no one thinks about it, because the water is never up on both crossings at once. And as long as one crossing is open, you are never trapped on the low mile. You can always go back the way you came. That was the calculation the mother was carrying, without knowing she carried it, as she drove the low mile that night with her sleeping thoughts on supper, and the bath, and the baby coming. One crossing open means you're never trapped. She had crossed the first slab under an inch of water. It would be there when she came back, if she needed to come back. She had a door behind her. She always had a door behind her. Every valley person drives the low mile with that door at their back, and it is such a certainty that it isn't even a thought. It's the floor the other thoughts stand on. She had no way to know that behind her, in the few minutes since they'd crossed, the ridge water had reached the first slab, that the inch had become 4 inches, then a foot, then a brown shoving wall, in the dark, unseen, closing the door at her back while she drove away from it toward the second crossing. She had no way to know she was already trapped, and had been since the first slab, and that the low mile had become, in the space of a few hundred yards of easy driving, the loneliest place in the county. The girl had gone quiet, drifting, her bare feet tucked up under her, and her head finding the cool of the window. The heater ticked. The wipers moved slow across a windshield that had almost nothing to wipe. And the headlights came around the last bend before the second crossing, and lit the second slab. And the mother put her foot on the brake in a way that woke the girl, because the second slab was not there. Where the road should have dipped down and crossed the creek, there was only water. Not the thin silver skim of the first crossing an hour ago. This was a brown roll of it, moving fast, a foot deep over where the slab should be, and climbing visibly, the little white sign standing up out of it at a drunk angle with the water already partway up its pole. The marks painted on the pole, the flood gauge, the marks the mother had never in her life seen the water reach, were under the surface to the second mark, the third, while she sat there with her foot on the brake and her headlights on the moving water, and her mind refusing, for a long, slow second, to understand. Then she understood, and she was calm, because she was a valley woman, and she had a door at her back. She said, out loud, in the easy voice, "Well, we can't cross that." And she said it almost cheerfully, for the girl, who was awake now and looking at the water with the beginning of a frown, "We'll just go back over the other one and take the long way, okay? Little adventure." And she put the wagon in reverse and turned in her seat to look back the way they'd come, and started to back the car around on the narrow road to point it home the other direction. And her headlights, swinging, caught the low mile behind them, and the low mile behind them was going under. She stopped the car. She looked at it a long moment, the water coming up onto the road behind them the same as it was coming up ahead, the creek that had been off to their right the whole low mile now spreading up out of its bed and across the road in a black sheet. And she made the calculation one more time, fast. And this time it came out wrong. This time it came out to a number she couldn't stand. Both crossings under, both doors shut. The creek up over its banks and rising, climbing now out of the fords and onto the low mile itself, which meant the water wasn't just cutting off her exits. It was coming for the road they were sitting on. All of it. The whole stretch. And there was nowhere on that mile of road that the water wasn't going to reach. She did not let the girl see the calculation. That was the first of the things she did that night that the girl would spend a lifetime understanding the importance of. She turned back around in her seat, and she made her voice into the easy voice again, and she said, "Change of plans, Bug. We're going to sit up on the high spot and wait for the water to go down. It always goes down. We'll just wait it out." and it'll be a good story. And she drove the wagon, slow, through water that was already over the road, to the one place on the low mile that stood up even a little. There's a place on the low mile where the road humps up over an old stone culvert, a rise of maybe 2 feet above the rest, where a smaller branch runs under the road to join the cutchin. It is nothing. It is a swell in the blacktop you wouldn't notice driving over it in daylight. But it was the highest ground available, and the mother knew it was there, and she put the wagon up on it and set the parking brake and turned off nothing. Left the headlights on, left the heater running because the girl was already shivering, and because light and warmth were things she could still give. And they sat on the high spot in the middle of the rising water and waited. For a while, it was almost all right. That is the cruelty of the middle of that night. That there was a stretch of it that was almost all right. The two of them up on the little rise in the warm car with the headlights making a bright room of the water around them, and the mother telling the girl it would be fine. They'd wait. The water would go down. The girl half believed it, because the girl was 5, and her mother had never once been wrong about anything that mattered. The mother half believed it, because the believing half was the only half she could afford to let talk. The water came up to the tires. They watched it climb the wheels in the headlight glow, the brown water rising against the rubber, and the mother kept her voice light and named it like a game. There it is at the tires. That's okay, that's still low. Because if she made it a thing they were watching together instead of a thing that was happening to them, the girl could bear it. And if the girl could bear it, the mother could too. The water reached the tops of the tires. The car took on a faint difference underneath them, a lightness, the smallest sway when a surge rolled through, the wagon wanting to lift and held down by its own dead weight and the parking brake, and not much else. And then, under the rush of the water, the mother heard the other sound, and for the first time in the girl's life, she saw her mother look afraid. It came from the creek side, from the deep dark past the headlights where the main channel ran. A slow, heavy, shifting sound, inside the noise of the water, but not the water. A displacement, the sound of something large changing its position in the shallows. Something coming up. Something the low water had kept down in the deep holes of the cutchin, in the cold green-black places under the banks, where the creek doesn't move even in a drought. And that the flood was now lifting free, letting up. The way high water floats a sunk log off the bottom. The mother did not know what it was at first, but some deep memory of listening to her grandmother's stories about the creek, stories she had dismissed, told her that it was a thing the signs were really about. The calculation of the night had just gained a problem she had no way to solve. The mother understood it by degrees. It could only reach as high as the water. She felt it the first time when the water was at the tires. A bump, low, against the front wheel. A nudge, then a slow, deliberate pressure. Something taking hold of the tire under the water and testing it. Pulling. The whole car shifted on the high spot, and the brake held, and the pulling stopped. Down low, down at the water line, exactly, where the flood had climbed to and no higher. She sat very still with her hands on the wheel and understood, in a cold, flat rush, that the thing in the water could reach the height the water reached, and that this was the whole rule of it, that it rode the flood the way they'd ridden the low mile, and could only go where the water carried it. Which meant they were safe by exactly as much as they were high, and the water was still coming up. She began then to make the calculation. The danger was the water line. Safety was the distance between the water line and them. Every inch the water rose was an inch the thing could rise. And the roof of the wagon was the highest place there was. The water came up the doors. It climbed the metal in the headlight glow, and when it reached the level of the door handles, the mother heard the handles move. A rattle, a click, the outside handle of the passenger door working up and down. Something on the far side of the glass, trying the door the way a person tries a locked door. Patiently. From the water. The girl screamed and the mother's arm came across her, fast, flat, pinning her back into the seat and away from the door. And the mother said, in a voice with no lightness left in it, the first hard thing she had said all night. "Don't look at the windows. Look at me. Keep your eyes on me." Because she had seen that the working of the handle came exactly to the height of the water, to the water line on the glass, and not a finger higher. And the water line was at the handles now, halfway up the door, and she did not want the girl to learn what she had just learned, which was that you could measure the reach of the thing outside by reading the water on the glass. Halfway up the door. That was how much of the night was left. You could read it like a gauge. The mother sat with her arm across her child. She made the calculation. She watched the water climb the glass, an inch, and another, its reach climbing with it. And she understood that the whole question of the night had narrowed to one clean line, whether the water would crest below the roof or above it. If it crested below the roof would stay dry, and the thing could not reach the roof, and they would live. If it crested above the roof, there would be no dry place left, and no height left, and the reach would come to wherever they were. The car began to float. She felt it go, the tires leaving the road, the last of the dead weight that had held them down giving way to the flood, the wagon turning slow and free on the moving water. The one mercy in it was that floating meant they rose with the water instead of drowning in place. The car would ride up on the flood, and the roof would stay, for now, above it. The headlights still burned, somehow, under the surface now, throwing a green, drowned light down into the moving water. And in that light, when they came near the glass, the mother could see the pale, reaching shapes of it. More than one. Coming at the doors from more than one place, and every one of them rose as the water rose, testing along the seam of the water and the glass, patient, never breaking the surface, never rising above the line the flood had drawn. When the water reached the windows, the car stopped being a place they could stay. The mother made the last calculation. Inside the car, the water was coming in now, at the door seams, at the bottom of the doors, cold and rising around their feet, their shins, and she understood that when the car filled, the water line would be inside it, everywhere, and the thing's reach would be everywhere the water was, which would be everywhere. The car was about to become the worst place on the low mile, and outside the car, there was exactly one place still higher than the water, the roof. The roof stood above the flood by a foot, by the last foot there was, a rectangle of wet metal shining in the risen moon. The rain had passed, the clouds had torn open, and a hard white moon had come out over all that moving water and lit the roof of the wagon like the last dry stone in the world. She got the window down. It was the old kind, a crank, and the water stood at the top of the glass, so that winding it down let the creek pour in over their laps, cold as knives, and the girl fought her, because everything in a body screams not to let the water in. But the mother got it down, all the way down, and the flood came in around them, and the car sank lower with the weight of what came in, and she took hold of her child. She said, fast, close, in the last of the easy voice with the hardness underneath it, "We're going up on the roof. You're going first. When you're up there, you get in the middle, the very middle, and you hold on. And you do not reach down. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, you do not reach down past the edge of the roof, because past the edge is the water, and the water is how it comes. Do you hear me? Stay in the middle, and hold on, and don't reach down." Say it back. And the girl, 5 years old, up to her waist now in creek water inside her mother's car, said it back. Stay in the middle, hold on, don't reach down. And the mother lifted her up, through the window, into the moonlight, out onto the roof. The girl came up out of the window into cold air and moonlight, and got her bare feet and her hands onto the wet metal of the roof. Her mother's hands were under her, pushing, lifting, steady, and for one moment the girl was rising and safe, and her mother's hands were sure beneath her. And in that moment, the water took its chance. Because in that moment, the girl's foot, her bare left foot, dropped for just a second below the edge of the roof, into the top of the flood, as her mother pushed her up. And something closed around her ankle. It did not feel like a hand. It felt like too many fingers, and they were joined, webbed, cold beyond cold, and they closed around her ankle with a grip that was not trying to pull her down, so much as trying to keep her, to hold the part of her that had dropped into the water. And it began to close. Hard. Harder. The webbed grip tightening around the small bones of her ankle with a cold that went into her like a brand. Her mother felt the girl catch, felt her stop rising, felt the water pulling back against her from below. And her mother did the last thing that used up all the calculation she had left. She shoved the girl up, hard, both hands, all of her, up and over, up onto the middle of the roof and out of the water's reach. And the wrenching of it tore the girl's ankle free of the webbed grip. Tore it free so hard and so fast that the grip left its whole shape behind in the skin, its splayed, joined fingers printed into the girl's ankle. But free. The girl came free and up and onto the roof, into the middle, above the waterline, above the reach. And her mother, in the shoving of her up, spent everything she had to get the girl those last inches higher than the flood. She was in the water to her chest at the window, and had nothing left for herself. The water crested a foot below the roof. The girl, in the middle of the roof, in the moonlight, holding on the way she'd been told, looked down past the edge the way she'd been told not to. Because she was 5, and don't is a kind of instruction a frightened child's body cannot always follow. And she saw it. The one clear look. The only one. The one she has never been able to give away to anyone. It came up out of the water at the window in the white moonlight, and it was pale, and it was too long, and it had too many places along it that reached, and the reaches were not arms and were not hands, but they closed like hands, webbed and splayed, the same shape that was even then burning itself into her ankle. And every one of them rose exactly to the top of the water, and not 1 inch above it. It did not lunge. It had not lunged all night. It only reached to the waterline, patient, and closed around her mother where her mother stood chest deep at the window. And it drew back down into the water the way the tide draws back, without hurry, without violence, taking with it everything that was below the top of the flood, which was all of her mother but her face, and her shoulders, and her raised, reaching, empty hands. And her mother did not scream. Her mother, going down into the water, kept her face turned up to the roof, up to the girl, and did not look at the thing, and did not look at the water. And with the last of the air she had, she said it one more time. The only lesson, the whole of her love pressed down into 3 plain words. Stay in the middle. And then the moonlight was flat and white on the water where she had been. And the girl was alone on the roof, 1 foot above the highest the thing could reach. She stayed in the middle. She held on. She did not reach down. She did the one thing her mother told her, all night long, in the cold and the moonlight, above the black, moving water, until the water went down. A flash flood recedes almost as fast as it rises. That is the last cruelty of the calculation. If the 2 of them had gone up onto the roof together, if her mother had climbed up beside her instead of staying at the window to push, the water would have crested a foot below them both. They would have sat together on that roof in the moonlight, 1 foot above the highest the thing could go. There was room. There was time. Her mother could not have known the water would crest where it did, and she had spent everything she had buying her child a foot of height, and had come up exactly 1 foot short for herself. The creek pulled back down into its bed by the gray of the morning, muttering, brown, ordinary, an innocent foot of water sliding over the slab where hours before it had been a wall. The wagon grounded on the low mile, canted over, its windows down, its inside packed with mud to the seats. The girl was on the roof. She had been on the roof for hours in the cold, and she does not remember most of them. And the men who found her, a county road crew, come out at first light to see about the crossings, said later they took her at first for a bundle of something the flood had left. A snarl of cloth and branch caught on the car, until the bundle lifted its head and looked at them. They got her down. They wrapped her in a coat. They asked her where her people were, and she could not say it. They found the answer themselves soon enough. They were gentle with her in the way of hard men who have found a thing they will not talk about later. They dragged the creek for 3 days. They found the crib, still bolted in its pieces in the back of the wagon. $20 worth of crib for a baby that would never sleep in it. The flood took the whole spring that had been coming, and left only the girl, on the roof, in the middle, holding on. They never found the mother. The cutchin keeps its deep holes cold and green and still, even in flood. The old people in that county say what goes down into them does not always come back up. And the road crew who dragged the creek for 3 days would not say, afterward, what they thought about that. Only that they had dragged worse creeks and found what they were looking for. And this one they did not. The county put up new signs after that year, at both crossings. Same 3 words. When flooded, turn around. As if the words had been the failure. As if a careful woman hadn't read them her whole life and made the calculation right, and been closed in from behind anyway by a creek that came up faster than any calculation. The girl is grown now, older than her mother ever got to be, which is a strange country to live in, being older than your own mother. And she lives in it quietly. She lives away from water, on high ground, in a dry upland county where the creeks are small and honest and stay in their beds. And she has never once in her adult life driven a low water crossing. Not one. Not an inch of moving water over a slab. And she never will. The people who love her think it is a small, odd fear, and she lets them think it, the way she lets the doctors think the scar on her ankle is a birthmark. Because the truth is not a thing she can hand to people who were not on that roof. But she knows what the scar is. She knows the shape of it, the joined, webbed fingers of it, splayed and closed, because she has the same shape printed on the inside of her eyes. And she sees it every time the water in her own life comes up. Every hard rain, every creek past its banks on the news, every flooded slab with its little white sign. She sees the pale reach of it rising exactly to the top of the water, and no higher. And she does, without meaning to, the calculation her mother taught her without meaning to. The truest thing anyone ever gave her, that it can only reach as high as the water lets it, and that every inch you keep between yourself and the flood is an inch it cannot come. Her mother kept her a foot above it, made the calculation with the last of herself, and came out a foot short. 1 foot, and has been under the cutchin now for far longer than she was ever alive above it. And the low water crossings in that county still stand where they stood, with their little white signs and their gauge poles marked up the side, waiting for 2 days of rain on the ridges, waiting for the water to come up in the dark hours after the sky's gone quiet, come up high enough to float the thing in the deep holes free, and let it reach the road again. And when the girl's own child asks her someday about the scar, and a child always asks, she will not tell them a birthmark. She has decided that much. She will sit them down, and she will show them the shape of it, the wrong joined fingers of it, and she will teach them the only thing worth teaching, the thing that cost what it cost. Stay above the water, stay in the middle, don't reach down past the edge. Three roads, 3 ways to be caught out in the dark with no way home, and something already moving toward you. The county is full of them, and every one of them is just a way of making sure that when it finds you, you're already stopped. That's where we'll leave it tonight. If these stories kept you company out there in the dark, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next journey into the unknown. And if you've got a story of your own, something that found you on an empty road with a dead engine and a long way to walk, email it to us. We may just tell it here someday. Until then, remember, the safest thing you can do on a dark road in Hollow County is keep the car running. Because the only thing worse than breaking down out here is finding out you're not the only one who stopped.